Asserting that India's infrastructure is a mismatch with its growth ambitions, Finance Minister Arun Jaitley proposed a sizable 70,000 crore rupees increase in investment in the sector in Budget 2015. Jaitley stressed on the need to revitalize public-private partnership or PPP mode of infrastructure development. Listing infrastructure among 5 major challenges he has to reckon with, Jaitley said it is a challenge for the government to increase investment in the sector and public investment needs to step in. To augment power sector, the government will set up 5 more ultra-mega power projects entailing investment of around 1 lakh crore rupees.
So the investor says, well, in India, and this is one of the Japanese investors met me recently and told me bluntly on my face, you increase your FDI limits, you lay down a red carpet, and once we enter, for the next 5 years, you make us run from office to office for permissions, which is probably true. So I started looking at a system, which I have indicated in the budget, where instead of multiple prior permissions, can we have a regulator with guidelines? You start business straight away in India on basis of those guidelines. Now, that's the ease of doing business.
Business leaders welcome the announcement made in the budget.
It's been a budget for the country. What is good for the country, the budget has addressed that.
सबसे पहले अगर ये इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर पे ही वो तवज्जो रखेंगे और डेवलपमेंट शुरू होगी इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर की, तो जॉब्स भी क्रिएट होंगे. कंस्ट्रक्शन से 40% जॉब्स आते हैं और ये उन्होंने इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर को दिखा मतलब आगे करके he has actually moved in the right direction.
The government also intends to establish a national investment and infrastructure fund. Another step that will help increase the fund flow into the sector, the government will permit tax-free infrastructure bonds for projects in rail, road and irrigation sectors. For the road sector, Finance Minister announced connecting each of the 178,000 unconnected habitations with all-weather roads. Siddhant Sibal, DD News, New Delhi.
जिस शांतिपूर्ण माहौल में जम्मू कश्मीर का चुनाव संपन्न हुआ है, उसके लिए मैं चुनाव आयोग को इसके लिए मैं बधाई देना चाहता हूं. इसके लिए मिलिट्री और पैरामिलिट्री फोर्सेस को बधाई देना चाहता हूं. इसके लिए जम्मू कश्मीर की मैं जनता को मैं बधाई देना चाहता हूं. और बहुत ही एक शांतिपूर्ण और स्वस्थ माहौल में वहां का चुनाव संपन्न हुआ है. और मैं समझता हूं कि लोकसभा में जो एक टर्नआउट था वोट्स का, मैं समझता हूं कि उससे भी अधिक टर्नआउट यदि रहा है तो इस बार जम्मू कश्मीर के विधानसभा के चुनाव में रहा है. इसके लिए जम्मू कश्मीर की जनता ये बधाई की पात्र है.
Germany will be spending more on its military in the coming years. That's according to the country's finance minister. London, on the contrary, is expected to cut its defence budget, which is causing unease across the Atlantic. Last month, President Obama warned the UK against slashing the budget. And as Lizzie Phelan reports, the pressure has been building up for quite some time now.
The good old times for Europe's military-industrial complex are back. In the wake of the crisis in Ukraine, more and more European NATO members are firing up the idea of a Russian threat to beef up their militaries.
It's obvious how much Europe is now affected by the instability in our neighbouring regions. The policy of the Kremlin with all the consequences for Ukraine and for our peace architecture in Europe.
In recent months, we've seen a barrage of supposed evidence of Russian aggression. From fake photos of Russian tanks, which turned out to have been taken in a different place at a different time, to a supposed Russian airplane in British airspace, that turned out to be Latvian, and mysterious Russian submarines in Swedish waters, which were never found.
Does it look like a submarine on patrol? Because that could equally be a whale with a toupee, or a penguin on a surfboard, or absolutely anything else in the world.
But that's not stopped some politicians from advocating a tougher stance on Russia.
We talked about the largest threat that Ukraine faces today, and that is Russia's continued aggression in the East. Now, there's no other way to call it.
Keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans down. That was the motto of NATO's first Secretary General, Lord Ismay, in 1949. And while Germany may no longer be Europe's bad boy, the Cold War idea of a Russian threat is being touted more and more by some NATO members. In Germany now, the country's defense minister has promised that in years to come, they will have more cash to splash on weapons. But perhaps the most drastic changes are in the small Baltic states. A recent report by the European Leadership Network reveals Estonia is the only country after the US to meet the NATO target of spending 2% of GDP on the military. Lithuania will see a sharp one-third rise in its defense budget, whereas neighboring Latvia is splashing out more than 54 million euros on a package that includes 123 British combat vehicles.
The idea is for NATO country to buy US military gear, if possible, or manufacture their own, but preferably buy F-15, F-16. This is about money. It's always about money. It's always about profit.
And with shrinking budgets among powerful NATO members such as Britain and France, the big guns in Washington remain intent on touting that as a sign of weakness rather than frugality. Lizzie Phelan, RT.
Well, the main idea you develop in your book is that war has been a crucial and sometimes positive factor in the development of human societies. What made you believe that?
Well, it's this extraordinary thing. I mean, for people living through wars, wars are pretty much the most terrible thing that can happen to you. But if you look at the very long run of human history, going back, say, 15,000 years to the end of the last ice age, you see this really surprising thing, that war has been the main force driving the creation of bigger societies, as conquerors take over conquered, bring them together into a single group. And as that has happened, the unexpected side effect of it has been that the rulers of these bigger societies have pacified the society internally, and the overall effect over 10,000 years has been to slowly drive down the rates of violent death.
Well, as you just pointed out, to reach that conclusion, you analyzed the last 10 or 15,000 years, but let's admit, most of our viewers do not operate on such a timescale. People are primarily interested in what concerns them or perhaps their children. So I wonder if those positive workings of war could be discerned within the lifetime of 1 or 2 generations.
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes there's a war that changes the world so abruptly that people can really see the consequences. And of course, sometimes, for individuals living through all this, what you really see are these terrible consequences that come out of a war. Other times, though, people, sometimes within a single generation, are able to say, well, that war is a terrible thing, but the results have generally been positive. A classic example of this would be here in the United States, the American Revolutionary War. On the whole, terrible thing to live through, but the people came out of it said, well, we're sort of glad that happened.
देश के लगभग सभी हिस्सों में तेज हवाओं के साथ हुई झमाझम बारिश से मौसम ने एक बार फिर करवट ली है। शनिवार देर रात शुरू हुई बारिश का सिलसिला लगातार जारी है। मैदानी भागों में झमाझम बारिश हुई तो जम्मू कश्मीर और हिमाचल प्रदेश के ऊंचाई वाले भागों में बर्फबारी होने से तापमान गिर गया। देश के कुछ हिस्सों में बारिश होने के साथ साथ ओले भी गिरे। अचानक हुई बारिश और सर्द हवाओं ने फिर पारा गिराकर गर्म कपड़े निकालने को मजबूर कर दिया। दिल्ली और एनसीआर में बारिश और तेज हवाओं से तापमान नीचे चला गया। दिन भर आसमान में बादल छाए रहे और तेज हवाएं चलती रहीं। उत्तर प्रदेश में बीते 24 घंटों के दौरान हल्की से मध्यम बारिश हुई और लोग अपने घरों में सिमटे रहे। पंजाब और हरियाणा में भी जमकर बारिश हुई, जिससे दोनों राज्यों में पारा लुढ़क गया। उत्तराखंड की ऊंची चोटियों पर ताजा हिमपात होने तथा निचले इलाकों में बारिश होने से ठंडक फिर लौट आई। कश्मीर के ऊपरी भागों में बर्फबारी और मैदानी इलाकों में बारिश दूसरे दिन भी जारी रही। भारी हिमपात के कारण जम्मू श्रीनगर राष्ट्रीय राजमार्ग बंद हो गया है।
कल रात के डाउन ट्रैफिक के बाद, जिसमें कोई 3,500-4 हजार गाड़ी जम्मू पहुंची, उसके बाद काफी ज्यादा बर्फबारी शुरू हुई, स्पेशली टनल सेक्टर, काजीगुंड सेक्टर में। तो उस वजह से कोई 2-2, 2.5 फुट इस वक्त एक्यूमुलेशन होगी स्नो की। उस वजह से ट्रैफिक टोटल बंद कर दिया है। उसके अलावा 6-7 जगह राइट फ्रॉम नाशरी, मगरकोट, गामरू, शेरी सब जगह पे लैंडस्लाइड्स आ गए हैं। अभी क्लियर नहीं कर पा रहे हैं बिकॉज ऑफ द कंटिन्यूस डाउनपोर। जो ये थोड़ा मौसम स्टेबल होगा तो क्लियरेंस का काम शुरू करेंगे, लेकिन इस वक्त अभी रास्ता बंद है।
राजस्थान और गुजरात के अधिकतर हिस्सों में शनिवार रात से ही हो रही बारिश के कारण यातायात और जनजीवन प्रभावित हुआ है। मौसम में आए इस अचानक बदलाव की सबसे ज्यादा मार किसानों पर पड़ी। कई इलाकों में ओले गिरने से किसानों की सैकड़ों बीघा फसल बर्बाद हो गई है। वैज्ञानिकों का कहना है कि खेत में लगी अधिकांश फसलों के लिए तेज हवा के साथ हुई बारिश नुकसानदेह है। खासकर गेहूं व सरसों की समय पर बोई गई फसल को काफी नुकसान पहुंचने की आशंका है। मौसम विभाग के अनुसार अफगानिस्तान और पाकिस्तान के साथ लगते क्षेत्र के ऊपर पश्चिमी विक्षोभ के कारण बारिश हुई है। मौसम विभाग ने बताया कि अगले 48 घंटों तक बारिश का कहर जारी रहेगा और 3 मार्च के बाद असर थोड़ा कम होना शुरू होगा। ब्यूरो रिपोर्ट, डीडी न्यूज।
Ukraine may not be getting foreign weapons yet, but it's nevertheless receiving military aid from the UK. It will send personnel to help train Kiev's army. Prime Minister David Cameron revealed the plan while being quizzed by senior MPs. Journalist Brian McDonald thinks the possibility of getting military support from abroad is what's driving Kiev to continue the operation in the east.
The problem with Ukraine at the moment, with Kiev's authorities, is that one feels almost sorry sometimes for Poroshenko. I actually do believe that Poroshenko probably genuinely wants peace, much as Vladimir Putin wants also. Poroshenko has to try and keep the crazies under control, which are the right sector, and Yatsenyuk, who is a very aggressive individual, with his speeches recently. If Kiev feel that there's a possibility of getting arms or military support from a major Western country, they will continue the war. If they realize that they will not get the help, they will stop the war. It's very simple, because their army is completely inferior to the rebel forces.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is on a controversial visit right now to Washington, D.C. He's hoping to put the brakes on any potential nuclear deal with Iran. The Israeli leader left Tel Aviv on a high note, but not everyone's happy about his arrival.
I'm departing to Washington, D.C. on a crucial and even historic mission.
But that mission has angered many in Washington. Demonstrators chanting angry slogans have gathered outside a venue where Netanyahu is due to address a pro-Israel lobby group. Police had to drag some of the protesters out of the building. Well, the Israeli PM was invited to the US by Republican leaders, a step that was not endorsed by the president. For their part, Democrats have urged Netanyahu to postpone his speech in Congress, or at least to deliver it behind closed doors, but he's refused. Paula Sleer next takes a look at how American-Israeli relations have become more strained of late.
Do you remember the dialogue overheard by journalists? Except that now US President Barack Obama won't be dealing with the Israeli premier. Netanyahu might be on American soil, but the two leaders won't be meeting. Not that they liked each other to begin with.
We have a prime minister that is a Republican in his body and soul.
And when the Republican Congress invited the Republican senator from Israel, as some inside Israel jokingly referred to Netanyahu, they bypassed the American president. Party politics at its best.
The Republicans are using it to try to beat the Democrats over the head.
For Netanyahu, it's a photo op just 2 weeks before his country's elections. On the surface, Netanyahu wants to warn Washington about Iran's nuclear program. But many fear Netanyahu's also playing a game with US domestic politics to undermine and pressure Obama into changing his foreign policy. Obama wants to give negotiations a chance, but Netanyahu believes the deal on the table will allow Tehran within a year to create the bomb. American-Israeli relations are at a new low.
They have very, very different ways of looking at the world. For President Obama, his formative experience was working in Chicago as a community organizer, having an optimistic view of the way human beings can respond to change. For Benjamin Netanyahu, one of his formative experiences was sitting on his father's lap and having his father tell him about the evils of the Spanish Inquisition.
And ever since, Netanyahu has earned his place as Israel's doomsday leader.
And it's then that the Ayatollahs will show their true face and unleash their aggressive fanaticism on the entire world.
Not all Israelis support their prime minister's heavy-handedness, while at the same time, 3 in 4 Israelis don't trust Obama to stop Iranian nukes.
I think this Iran agreement that they're working on right now would be very difficult to undo and can lead to really very bad, harmful consequences.
But thanks to the political wrangling and point scoring, Israel might just find itself without its closest ally in preparing for what Netanyahu believes might just be its biggest test. Paul Islia, RT, Tel Aviv.
In central Moscow, thousands of people this afternoon have been marching to commemorate opposition figure Boris Nemtsov, who was shot dead near the Kremlin late on Friday night. These are live pictures now from the scene you're about to see, and this now is from RT's In the Now programme, has been alongside the mourners throughout the march. Let's catch up with her.
Kitai Gorod here in Moscow, very famous. It's in the heart of Moscow. I just want to give you an idea of what we're seeing here on the ground. So people are making their way down these steps from the metro and gathering for security checks. Basically, metal detectors have been set up. All of these people, thousands of them, there's a permission from the Moscow mayor for up to 50,000 people to come out to pay their respects to Boris Nemtsov. And it looks like the turnout is going to be phenomenal. There's definitely more than 7,000 people here. I'm going to pan out and give you a look of the riverbank here. Just show them the people lined along the Moscow riverbank, not far from the Kremlin here, have made their way. A sea of Russian flags. Many of them have black ribbons tied to them. This march, of course, was initially planned to be a sort of opposition mark. The first day of spring here in Russia, March 1st. Boris Nemtsov was one of the organizers, a big part of the opposition. It has turned into a memorial march, and as we've been here for over an hour, we can certainly say that the mood is solemn. It's definitely not one of a political sense. I just want to give you a view of what we're seeing down here on the ground. You can see the people marching here, people of all ages, children as young as, 4 years old, to elderly people with canes who can barely walk. So the spectrum of the type of people that come out is very wide-ranging, really. Lots of people with flowers, marching in silence. You hear very few slogans. A lot of people holding signs which just say names. This says Boris. Some of the signs say no words. So we're really seeing, in terms of the thousands of people, very few people really politicizing this march. It should be said there were some Ukrainian flags. There were certainly different parties, opposition party flags. But compared to the thousands and thousands of Russian flags with black ribbons on them, obviously mourning for Nemtsov, it was nothing. So most people here, I think it's fair to say at this point, as we're coming to an end, came here to simply pay their respects.
Activists in the UK say the nation's police force just isn't ethnically diverse enough. They say a lack of officers from minority groups actually leads to mistrust among the public. Picking up the story here for a closer look, RT's Anastasia Churkina.
The debate around the representation of black officers in the UK police force is far from over.
It's a reality that the police service is institutionally racist. Promotion, retention,
discipline are all disproportionately applied or disapplied to black and ethnic minority crews.
The British capital is home to hundreds of ethnicities and languages. 40% of Londoners and rising are from an ethnic minority, but are represented by only 11% of the 32,000 Met police officers. Nationally, it's just 5%. Critics say this comes nowhere near fair representation. Serving police officer and spokesperson for the Met Black Police Association, Janet Hills, says community confidence, trust, as well as equal opportunity for officers are for now only a dream.
The challenge has been quite great, identifying, that we are talented and that I'm able to, deliver at the levels that the organisation wants, because I don't fit the norm of, the white middle-aged male, and that is the issue.
Janet says not only does institutional racism apply to being hired, but also when it comes to moving up the career ladder.
The majority of black, Asian minority staff are on the bottom runs of the organisation, so they're all at the constable rank. And then as you go up, we become fewer and fewer, because, no matter what aspirations you have, unless the process is right and fair, then you're not going to make it.
And while some senior officers have voiced concerns over the racial disproportion, others are said to fear that prioritizing filling in race gaps could lead to disaster.
There are great dangers in trying to force the issue. Like anything that involves any form of kind of racial integration, you have to give it time and you have to go with it. And if you try to force things along, it will go very, very wrong.
Race relations activist and politician Lee Jasper disagrees.
As a former policing director of London, I can tell you that there has been unconscious bias in the selection of police officers, and therefore you do need a sort of affirmative action, positive discrimination approach in order to get the numbers up. That doesn't mean a lessening in quality at all.
Meanwhile, analysts say that to become representative of the population in the next decade, 1 in 4 recruits need to come from a minority group. But with fewer than that currently being taken on, fair representation looks like being even further away. Anastasia Churkina, RT, London.
Go.